Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Ms. Catherine Herridge.
Thank you. Okay. To begin the presentation of JINSA's Henry M. Scoop Jackson Distinguished Service Award to Congressman Ed Royce, I would like to call Congressman Eliot Engel to the stage.
Well, thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. It's so nice to stand here and see such a nice, large crowd. JINSA is a wonderful organization, and thank you for supporting this wonderful organization, and thank you for your support of Israel and all the things that really unites us. We've had a rough week. It didn't only happen in Paris, it reverberated around the world, and the terrorist attacks in Paris are a stark reminder of the unprecedented dangers and challenges the United States and our allies currently face around the world. As you know, these include the rise of ISIS, Iran's nuclear program, and continued efforts to destabilize the region, Russia's military intervention in Ukraine and Syria, and the resurgence of Palestinian terrorism, along with many others. Now, all of these critical matters of national security require strong, bipartisan leadership in Congress. Now, I have always emphasized the importance of bipartisanship in foreign policy especially, and I truly believe the old adage that politics should stop at the water's edge. We have our differences on many issues, budget, health care, whatever, but when it comes to foreign policy, the world needs to see us speaking with one voice. As the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I want you to know that I feel very fortunate to have Chairman Ed Royce as my partner. Ed has demonstrated great leadership on a wide range of foreign policy issues during his entire service in Congress, and particularly in the years since he became chairman. The country is fortunate to have him in this key position, and I'm proud to call him my partner and my friend. On the critical issue of U.S. support for Israel and her people, Chairman Royce and I are in total agreement. From bipartisan legislation to combat the boycott, BDS campaign, to the U.S.-Israel Strategy Partnership Act and the Emergency Iron Dome Replenishment Act, the bilateral security relationship remains a top priority for both of us. Ed and I have traveled to Israel together. We've traveled to many countries together. We've confronted Abu Mazen. We've talked to people. We agree 100% in policy, U.S. policy, and we agree that the U.S.-Israel relationship is of paramount importance, and both of us work together to do everything we can to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship. As you know, JINSA's Henry M. Scoop Jackson Distinguished Service Award recognizes leaders who are guided by JINSA's mission that the United States requires a strong national defense. I share that mission. Ed shares that mission. We have worked together for the past 3 years, since we have our positions, to make sure that our committee works and runs on a bipartisan basis. We have a lot of people on the committee that don't agree with each other on many, many different issues. But Ed and I demand that people be respectful, and on the issue of U.S. support for Israel, we're almost in total agreement. You know, not long ago, about 3 years ago, Ed and I passed the Royce-Engel bill, which slapped sanctions on Iran for supporting terrorism. Believe it or not, we got it out of the Foreign Affairs Committee unanimously. It passed on the floor of the House of Representatives by a vote of 400 to 20. We only wish at that time that the Senate had taken our lead. But I tell you this because I want you to know how hard Ed works, and both of us together work, to ensure that there is bipartisanship. If there is no bipartisanship, then it's very difficult for the U.S. to move forward together. And if there's one thing there should be bipartisanship on, again, it's foreign policy. So let me tell you a few more personal things about Ed that I've gotten to know him in the 3 years. First of all, he's incredibly smart. He's incredibly hardworking. He has a love in his heart for Israel and is great to work with. And again, I feel so fortunate that Ed and I can continue to move the Foreign Affairs Committee together in a forward-looking pattern. So let me thank you for choosing Ed. Let me tell you that, in my opinion, there is no one else in Congress who is more deserving of this award. When we sit down together and we figure out different policies, not only relating to the Middle East, but all over the world, Ed and I are almost always in agreement. We share a very important centrist view of the world. And I know how hard Ed works each and every day to make sure that the United States is strong and to make sure that the United States moves forward in the right direction. So again, thank you for choosing Ed. There is no one else in Congress who's more deserving of this award, and I'm honored to present it to him this evening. Ed, would you please come up? So let me just read this. It says, JINSA, the 2015 Henry M. Scoop Jackson Distinguished Service Award, presented to Representative Ed Royce, California, 39th District, with respect and admiration for a career dedicated to a strong U.S. defense capability and close security cooperation with America's allies. 16th of November, 2015, Washington, D.C. Congratulations, Ed.
Thank you, Eliot. Thank you very much, Eliot Engel. And let me say this about the Scoop Jackson Award and the very concept behind it. Scoop Jackson said, when it comes to national security, the best politics is no politics. And with respect to my friend Eliot Engel, I believe that one of the reasons we function so well on the Foreign Affairs Committee is because he asks of all of us, as he shared with you tonight, that we leave the politics out of it. We do what's good for the national security of the country. We keep our focus on the fact that other people pay attention to what we're saying here, and we should say it with one voice, and we should be resolute when we say it. And frankly, the success or the times when I can count when we've made a difference are times when Eliot Engel has been out there on the front. One of those was after the discovery of those tunnels. And Eliot and I went into the tunnels. The one we went into came up underneath a school. But this is where I want to talk about the importance of JINSA. We saw that. But when we were there was a team also in country from JINSA, a team of former U.S. military. And I want to recognize tonight, again, those who won that Grateful Nation Award. That team of officers were doing an assessment on the rules of engagement, and they were seeing firsthand during that strife how it was that Hamas was operating. And the intention with that particular tunnel, it turns out, was to capture students and take them back through the tunnel and then hold them in Gaza and force the IDF to fight block by block by block to free those children. That was the intent. Now, luckily, the tunnel was discovered soon enough. But the reality for us is that without JINSA putting out that report that explained exactly what Hamas was doing with human shields, exactly what Hamas had in mind in terms of the use of civilians for their devious ends. Without that awareness, we would not have been able to rally this Congress for the type of unanimous vote that we passed in support of Israel with respect to the condemnation of the use of human shields by Hamas. And afterwards, while we were there, Eliot Engel and I went on CNN with Wolf Blitzer and explained exactly what we were seeing. But afterwards, when we got back, we brought those officers up to testify before Congress. Now, I want to talk just for a second about Mike Mikulski and what he did in terms of the legislation which Eliot and I authored in order to try to bring pressure to bear. We wanted real leverage in this equation. We wanted, with respect to this argument over how to handle Iran, to give the administration a tool where the Ayatollah would have a choice between compromise on his nuclear program or economic collapse. That's what the legislation that we worked with senior officials in the Treasury Department would have done. And as Eliot shared with you, we passed that legislation, but one of the reasons we passed it was because Mike came and testified before our committee, and because of the momentum that we helped create. We would have had the support in the Senate, frankly. At one point, we had 66 senators in support, but it was bottled up in the Senate, unfortunately. And so we went into that negotiation without the leverage that you and I know you always have to have in order to get your side heard. And the consequences, again, as JINSA has pointed out in the testimony that we've taken in committee, where we have heard from officers who have a long time experience with dealing with Iran and dealing with the Quds Force, dealing with people like General Soleimani, who cost the lives of over 600 Americans. Their testimony as to the nature of this regime, the untrustworthiness of the regime in Iran, the fact that Iran habitually cheats on all of its agreements, at least has informed Congress to the point where close to 60% of Congress voted against that agreement. But at least we're better served in the knowledge going forward that when we turn to the issue of enforcement of the existing agreement, we have the facts at our disposal. We can go to JINSA. Now, there's another argument that I want to lay out for you in terms of where JINSA has been important. 4 years ago, I wrote a piece for the newsletter that JINSA puts out, largely to the military, and it was rebutting this idea that, that the jihadist movement was on the ropes. As I argued at the time, the evidence points to quite the opposite. And obviously, JINSA was of the opinion as well that rather than a spent force or rather than being constrained, that this movement, frankly, represents a key threat to the West, a key threat to the very ideals that this republic was founded on, including the freedom of religion and freedom of speech, the autonomy of the individual. All of that is anathema to the jihadist movement and to ISIS. And today we find ourselves in a position where we have 25,000 foreign fighters, which JINSA has warned about, 25,000 foreign fighters, and over 4,500 of them have passports from the West. This is our latest challenge. And this is a challenge, if we don't meet it, if we don't deter it, will lead to the kinds of terrorist attacks that we recently saw in Paris and Beirut and on the metro liner in Egypt. The reality is that we had the chance several years ago when this ISIS movement was in Raqqa, coming out of Raqqa, and again, I turned to some of JINSA's work on this. And it wasn't just JINSA, by the way, on this issue. It was also our ambassador in Baghdad. It was Eliot Engel and I in the committee and our committee members saying, strike now. They're on the open desert. They're in pickup trucks with their black flags flying. They're on their way to Fallujah. They're leaving Syria. Hit them on the open road. As we said in committee, there were 118,000 airstrikes during the first Gulf War when 42 divisions invaded Kuwait. And the consequences of those 118,000 airstrikes were that it obliterated all of the armor and all of the divisions on the ground. So why not do the logical thing and hit ISIS now before it becomes a problem? And after Fallujah, we made the same argument, city after city, until they reached Mosul. And then it was a plea: don't let them take Mosul. The central bank is in Mosul. And again, we failed to order any air support. 12 months of no air support against ISIS. And when ISIS took Mosul, they took the central bank, and they took $750 million. And at that point, they were the best funded terrorist organization on the planet. And then we had the hearings that we held and the work that we did with the Kurdish forces. 180,000 Kurdish men and women. 30% of these troops are female. Women in female battalions on the ground trying to fight ISIS, as we were trying to get them the armament that they needed. They've got 40-year-old weapons. They've got small arms, and they're up against ISIS. 3 times their foreign minister came to us to request anti-tank weapons, artillery, long-range mortars, so that they could push back ISIS on the ground. And we've gone a full year. Well, we've yet to establish the principle that we in the United States are willing to defy the Shia-led government in Baghdad and defy the government in Iran and transfer that weaponry directly to these Kurdish forces. And by the way, there are Yazidi men as well that want these weapons. They're on a 650-mile front. And that is another way that we could do more than contain ISIS. But again, without us having the intellectual ammunition, without us having the argument of those in the military and retired military willing to come forward, those generals and those admirals supplied by JINSA to come up before our committee and testify on these arguments, we wouldn't have that full force of support behind these positions. And my hope is that after the attack in Paris, it crystallizes the thinking, as even the former director of the CIA yesterday, of President Obama's CIA director, said, we need a new approach. Yes, we do. We need a new approach with respect to what we do against ISIS. And lastly, let me just say, by way of our support, not just for the United States having that robust national security posture that Scoop Jackson asked of us, we have to remember that he said we should do the same, working in concert with our allies. And it's the commitment of Eliot Engel and myself to make certain that our allies have the qualitative military edge, for example, that Israel needs, and that our other allies around the world have the support they need in order to push back and be victorious. And so in closing, I would just end by thanking every one of you in this room today, because you're here because you know that ideas matter, and you know that bad ideas have bad consequences. You can't escape the bad consequences of bad ideas. And you want to put into the pipeline those ideas and those facts that are going to change policy. Thank you for doing that, because Western civilization really is under assault. You are the defenders. Thank you for supporting JINSA.